Hey, how's it going everyone? This is YLAM here. So in today's vlog, we're going to be testing out the 16 to 55, which is what I'm recording with right now, and then the 10 to 24. So these are two great lenses for vlogging. It's something that I do quite a bit. I don't post it to the YouTube channel, but it is something that I do enjoy doing. So I'm really curious to see how they will perform. So I'm going to have both of these. I'm going to try a few different setups, so I'm going to go over that before we start the vlogging setup. And I'm also going to be trying it out with ND filters because just like you, I'm kind of curious to see how it's going to perform. So let's go ahead and look through the setup on the camera really quickly, and then we can get to our test. So very quickly, I'm going to go over all of the movie settings that I'm going to be using for this test. Anybody's curious, I'm shooting on my X-T4 right now. So for movie, I'm going to be shooting at 4K at 30 frames, and I'm going to set it to 200 megabytes, which is the highest quality. I'm not going to go with the all intro setting because that's just a little bit too much, but I do want to try to set it to the highest quality settings that I can for vlogging purposes. I am going to use H.265, which is going to be the highest quality there. Going with long gop instead of all intro because I don't want to shoot at 400 megabytes per second. Just fills up the SD cards too quickly. Everything else is set to default at this point. For OIS, we'll be testing IBIS plus OIS and IBIS plus digital image stabilization. So we will test both of these. I won't test off because why would anybody want to have everything off? For the IS boost modes, I'm going to have that off and I will not be testing that. I could make another video if anybody's interested. If you are, just leave a comment and I'll be glad to do one. Other than that, there's really nothing else that I'm going to be changing. Just heading down. Film simulation, I like Astia. That's usually what I go with, so I'm going to go ahead and set it to that. White balance, because it's vlogging, I set white balance to auto, and if I want to, lock my white balance, I would do an auto white balance lock on a button, and I can just lock it off. But if you're doing anything professional, obviously you do want one constant white balance. Now, in terms of tone curves, color, and sharpness, I set those to 0 because that's really a preference thing, and this is not what the video is about. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave those at the neutral or default settings. Autofocus, I am going to have face and eye detect on, so that's really the only thing in here that I've changed. And if you're curious, I am using the Rode Wireless Go, and I have it set to medium on my Rode Wireless Go, and I'm using minus 19.5 dBs if you're anybody that's interested. And time codes, we're not changing anything of, and those are the user setups, which I'll cover in a different video. So that is the setup that I have. If you do have any questions about my setup, again, put it in the comments below and I'll try it out. But let's go ahead and get into the vlogging test. All right, so the first test of the day, I'm going to be doing most of this outside because there are people working inside right now. So it's just a little bit easier to do the outside test today. But this is with the 16 to 55. I am going to try to hold it as, steady as I can this time around. Try to do a little bit of rest in between takes, but this is what it looks like when I'm just walking around with it normally, trying to concentrate on, a good bit of speed, a good bit of stability, and also just what I'm talking to you right now. I think this is actually a really cool and nifty setup. This is probably a dream setup in terms of image quality and performance. Unfortunately, my arm probably is going to disagree with you on that because this is probably going to be the heaviest setup. And after a while, I'm already kind of feeling the weight of the camera. So definitely a trade-off between usability and image quality right here. It is a very drizzly day today, so it's overcast. It's raining a little bit, but not enough to where I'm worried about the camera. But I can tell you right now, with just this small short walk, it's already getting heavy to actually hold up this camera. So there is definitely a trade-off between image quality and trying to get a good setup where you can just talk for a really long time and have it be actually comfortable. So here is the second test. So I have digital image stabilization turned on right now, and we'll see if it actually is better or if there's any kind of warpiness to the actual image. Again, I'm trying to concentrate on holding the camera steady, looking into the lens, and walking at still a very reasonable pace. So with digital image stabilization, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it because I love the technology, but overall I just haven't really seen it to be, consistent enough and stable enough, and the quality sometimes can really change depending on the lens that you use. So hopefully with this 16 to 55 we don't see any weird warpiness to it, but you can never really tell until you test it out yourself. This is something that you're just going to have to do with every lens if you want to use digital image stabilization, because it's just different for every lens. But again, one thing that I will say is that this setup is pretty heavy, so it does wear on you very quickly, but you can tell that probably the image quality is one of the best when you actually use this lens. The 16 to 55 is definitely a really great lens. It's just really heavy when you have to hold your hand out this long. All right, so here is the next set of tests. So this is with the 16 to 55 without digital image stabilization, but I do have an ND filter turned on so that I can really drop the shutter speeds to normal, film standards. So about 1/60th of a second at 30 frames. So this should look a whole lot smoother because there should be much more motion blur inside the image. This is something that's pretty standard for a lot of people who like to film, but you do have to use an ND filter most of the time. Even with a day like this, you're usually shooting at 1/500th of a second without an ND filter. But with an ND filter, you can definitely drop it down to a much more manageable frame rate for filming anyway. So something that you really have to consider when you're actually filming, because these ND filters are super useful. It's just that you do have to carry them around, and they do add a little bit more weight to an already pretty heavy setup for the 16 to 55. But hopefully you can see an image quality difference in terms of motion blur. You probably should, but I'll be honest with you, when I'm vlogging most of the time, this is probably not something that I really care about, because most of the time people just don't really notice. And nowadays, with so many vloggers, most people just don't care. Alrighty, so last test of the day with the 16 to 55. So this one is with digital image stabilization turned on, and hopefully you'll see a noticeable difference with this one as well. Don't really know, haven't really reviewed the image myself, but you can let me know about that. As I said before, it's kind of a love-hate relationship. We'll see if it actually works better when you drop down the frame rates to 1/60th of a second, but I don't really know. One thing that I would like to add right in the middle of this film is that a lot of times these are the most unscientific tests ever, because there's really no meaningful or measurable way to really test optical and digital image stabilization all at once, because we're really, as vloggers, just trying to give you an idea of the type of performance that you're going to get in the real world, because it's going to change for everybody depending on your setup, how you like to dress, how your face is, all of those things. So just take this with a grain of salt, right? This is kind of just one data point in many data points that you should be looking at to see if this type of thing or the type of equipment that we're using is really going to work for you. Anyways, starting to really drizzle, so I'm going to go ahead, head back in, but we'll be testing the 10 to 24 next. Alrighty, so I'm back with the second test. So this is the 10 to 24. This is definitely my most preferred vlogging setup because it's just a nice in between. It's a much wider than the 18 to 55, but it's much lighter than the 16 to 55. Again, this is with OIS and IBIS turned on. There is no digital image stabilization for this particular test. And again, I'm trying to concentrate on making sure that I'm holding the camera as steady as I can, and I'm also still walking at a nice pace, normal walking speed. So this is something that I've been vlogging with for a very long time. So I'm very interested to see if there's going to be any changes for this particular setup. Now, right here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change it to 10 millimeters because this is basically ultra wide, and this kind of shows you how wide you can get with this lens, which is pretty amazing, but I can still hold it out at a pretty comfortable distance for myself so that I can hold it up for a very long time without really having to struggle with my arm. This is kind of one of the great benefits to the 10 to 24, and it's something that I really like to vlog with. Unfortunately, at 24 millimeters, it is very limiting in terms of photography you can do, so there definitely is a trade-off in that, but a lot of times when you're vlogging, that's a pretty good trade-off and something that you're willing to do. Alrighty, so this is test number 2, so I'm right around 14 millimeters. You really can't tell with this lens, but this is with digital image stabilization turned on. So again, doing the same test with digital image stabilizations. Now, one thing I will have to say is I've done this test many times with digital image stabilization, and pretty much every time the warpiness of the image really shows up right around this time. So I'm not sure if it's going to show up this time around. Maybe the IBIS unit will actually really help it out. I really don't know. Hopefully it does, but this is where I start really seeing inconsistencies, which is when we start really getting ultra wide, we start seeing real warpiness of the actual image. So hopefully that's not what's happening right now, but you will let me know. I'm gonna go ahead, change this to 10 millimeters, and we're gonna see if that makes any difference. So right now I am at 10 millimeters. So hopefully you'll see a difference in terms of the framing, but you also hopefully won't have like even more warpiness that's going on. Something that you're gonna let me know and I'm gonna watch afterwards, because honestly I'm just as interested as you are in terms of if this is going to be really warpy or not. It is a nice overcast day, so it is kind of dreary, so hopefully without the ND filter it doesn't get too gnarly for this particular image. But anyways, that's the next test that I'm going to do is with a ND filter on this lens, and we'll see how it turns out for this. All right, so this is the second round of testing with the 10-24. So now I do have an ND filter turned on. I have it set to 1/60th of a second to try to capture that consistent motion blur, which usually makes it a little bit easier to watch if you're used to watching films. But like I said, a lot of people actually don't mind it anymore because they're just used to things like video games and watching things on monitors with high refresh rates. But we're just going to test it out. I do like using ND filters, but you do have to be really careful. An example of this is that this particular ND filter right here, I can't use the last end of the, it's a variable ND filter, but I can't use the very end of its range in terms of maximum how dark it gets, because it does actually get darker in one of the corners. So for this particular one, the lower right hand side does get darker than the rest of the image, so I have to be very careful if I'm doing like a walking scene like this. But I know that just because I write it down in one of the cards before using it, and it's something that you do have to watch out for if you're going to be using a variable ND filter. Some of them, especially the wide ones, you're going to notice some artifacting, even with, especially with like the low end and even with like a mid-range copy like the one that I'm using. So for this particular day, not a big deal because I don't really have to turn it to maximum, but it is something that you do have to watch out for. All right, so very quickly, I kind of forgot to test this at 10 millimeters, which is something that I wanted to test for anyway, so I'm definitely gonna do it. So this is a quick test at 10 millimeters without digital image stabilization. Just gonna see real quickly whether or not this is actually any good, because yeah, I'm interested in myself. Definitely let me know what you think. But just a quick walk around back here, about 10 millimeters, see if it actually looks any good. Just walking normally, trying to hold the camera as steady as I can, and hopefully it turns out pretty well. All right, so this is the last test of the day. So this is with digital image stabilization with an ND filter turned on at 1/60th of a second. So we're gonna see if this is actually non-warpy, which is something that I would be super interested in, but this is the first test that I've gotten a chance to do with this camera, with this particular setup. I'm really hoping the IBIS system works really well and we can get some really nice crispy images out of this. But generally speaking, for this type of setup, it's usually a handheld static shot that works the best. But we're gonna see if it works or not. You know, I hope it does, but I'm not really sure about it. We're gonna see. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it to 10 millimeters. I actually forgot about turning it to 10 millimeters on the other film, so I'll do another quick test run of that in 10 millimeters just to make up for it. Completely forgot about that, but I'll just clip it in. But this is at 10 millimeters. We'll see how well it goes with 10 millimeters, and hopefully everything shows up well. It's hard to really tell, but one thing that I can tell real quickly before ending this is that this is definitely a much lighter setup, and it's much easier to vlog with because my arm isn't getting as tired, and I'm not thinking about it as much as I was with the 16-55. So that's a good sign. Probably going to continue to be my primary setup just because it's just much easier to use. So just wrapping up this video, right now I have the 10-24 on there set to 10 millimeters, so you can see how wide it is compared to the 16-55 that I started off with at the beginning of the video. And just to give you my initial thoughts, I think a lot of these lenses are pretty good, but I think there are a couple of standout ones. For me, if I'm going to do vlogging, I'm probably going to still go with my trusty 10-24 because of the versatility and because while I do love the 16-55, I do think it's relevant now because of the built-in IBIS of the X-T4. This is still a very heavy lens, and for vlogging purposes, when you're extending that camera, or sorry, extending that hand all the way out, it does get quite heavy very quickly, and you don't really recover from it very quickly. So if you're spending the whole day vlogging, this camera lens will definitely wear on you. So this is the reason why I don't think it's a top choice. If I had to choose between the top 4 of the ones that I've tested anyways, it's probably still going to be the 10-24. Then oddly enough, it's probably going to be the 18-55, the trusty kit lens. I think it just performs well overall. It's very light, it's very capable on the X-T4. Then it's probably going to be the 16-55, and then lastly the 16-80. I think the 16-55 still needs a little bit of tweaking from Fujifilm's before it actually gets better than the 16-55. There definitely is a lot to love about the 16-55 because it's going to be able to take some great images if you're a hybrid shooter, which when I'm vlogging, I'm definitely taking pictures as well as doing vlogs. So I really do want to love this lens, but it's really a heavy camera. It's also the reason why full frame cameras in general I would never vlog with, because they're so much bigger. The lenses are just as heavy as the 16-55, and it's not something that's very fun to vlog with. So for my purposes, I think I'll still stick with the trusty 10-24. Plus, having that ultra wide field of view for vlogging purposes is amazing. For photography, it's a little bit limiting, but that's okay because it's not like I'm doing photography for anybody else. It's really just for me. So I can live with the limitations of having only a 10-24, or I'll just bring the 55-200 with me. So those are my overall thoughts. If you watched the whole video, definitely let me know what you think about all of the different shots, which one you like, which one you think is better, because I would love to know your opinions, because this is a community and I definitely value everybody's feedback. Anyhow, that's all I have for this vlog. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're well and you're safe, and I'll see you in the next one.